Hi, I'm George Scott with the Town of Lewisboro Open Space and Preserves Committee. I'm also the head preserve steward at Leon Levy Preserve. Leon Levy Preserve is 370 acres located in South Salem, New York on Route 123, and we have over 6 miles of hiking trails here. This is a map that you'll see when you come to the preserve. We also have this year updated all the town-owned preserves, and we have a QR code here, so you can just hit this and download the map, and it's an Avenza map, so it will show you where you are at any point on the trail, so it's very difficult to get lost. We're going to be talking about the historic features of Leon Levy today with town historian Maureen Cole. In addition to the Lewisboro Trail Volunteers take care of all of Leon Levy Preserve, the trails and historic ruins, with the exception of the parking lot and the native plant garden, which is located in the parking lot. In addition to taking care of Leon Levy Preserve, the Town of Lewisboro Trail Volunteers, which again is part of the Town Open Space and Preserves Committee, takes care of the other 5 preserves and park trail systems in town. We have the Town Park, we have Oldfield Preserve, we have Brownell Preserve in Golden's Bridge, we have On a True Farm, which has 2 hiking trails, and Fox Valley Park has a couple of minor trails in Golden's Bridge. In addition to the historic features, which we'll see today with Maureen Cole, the town preserve here, Leon Levy Preserve, also has a number of natural features, which we'll see. There's a gorge overlook where you can look down. It's a drop of about 75 feet, and you can see down into the gorge. There's a vernal pool here. There is also West Valley, which is a little bit of a hike from here, but it's a tranquil valley on the west side of the preserve. We're here at the Stone Gorge Bridge that goes across the gorge. This was built by for Dr. James Crafts, who owns the Black Mansion that we'll see in a little while. Italian stonemasons built this gorge, and it starts way up around the corner up there, and altogether it's over 200 feet long. And the part that we're standing on is 17 feet wide and 8 feet high. And it's built all of dry laid stones with dirt and rubble filled in the middle. Over here you can see this is one of his original carriage roads. We built a lot of the trails around his original carriage roads. And in a minute we'll take a look at the downside there, which shows some of the stonework that's done. And over here is the gorge. All of this side of the gorge, all the water that falls here goes into Stamford, Connecticut water supply. All of the water that falls on this side becomes part of New York City watershed, and the water eventually goes into the reservoirs. Any water that's left over winds up going into the Hudson River and then into New York Harbor and, of course, the Atlantic Ocean. All of this water that isn't used by the Stamford watershed winds up going into Long Island Sound.
Hi, I'm Maureen Cole, the Lewisboro town historian, and I'm really glad to be hiking these trails on this nice, cool summer morning. George talked about the carriage roads, a little bit about the carriage roads that were built throughout this wonderful 100-acre plus estate of James Crafts, who was a scientist and around the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. He was lucky enough to have the expertise of Italian stonemasons who had come over in the 1890s to help build the Ridgefield water supply. And all those roads, very similar in construction to the ones here in Leon Levy, you'll find in Mountain Lakes Park on the border between Lewisboro and North Salem. But just to look at the magnificent stonework that these masons performed, and we're looking at roads that were made in the 1890s. So they have been standing over almost 125 years. They've stood the test of time, and they were built because these people, money was no ex- it was well, people had money. They needed to get away from their humdrum lives in whatever city they were in, and so they would come to an unknown, unspoiled place like our town, and they would build these large houses on the hill. We'll see the Black Mansion, the Crafts Mansion a little bit later. But there was a gentleman named H.B. Anderson who came to Ridgefield to build the Ridgefield water supply. And he set his mansion on the top of Wakabuck Mountain on the border between North Salem and South Salem. He was the one that imported the stone workers from Italy to build his water system and to build the carriage roads for H.B. Anderson's estate. George Crafts, being here at the same time, I'm pretty sure had the use of the same masons, the same artisans who came over from Italy. And the carriage roads were just, as I said, these were men or families with money to build a playground for themselves for their leisure time. And they would build the carriage roads, and then they would have their guests come, and they could spend the day on their horse and carriage, riding through this wonderful woodlands, exploring nature. It was kind of a time when people wanted to get back to nature. So that's why quite a few miles of carriage roads exist here in Leon Levy, which we now put to good use as hiking trails. And you'll find the same thing, as I said, at Mountain Lakes Camp too. So enjoy the beautiful rocks, enjoy the scenery, and thank George Crafts, thank James Crafts for making it all possible for us 125 years later. Here's one of the mysteries of the Leon Levy Preserve. We call it the cottage ruins. Of course, we don't really know who built the cottage or at what time the cottage was built. Probably built during the lifetime of Professor Crafts, which would mean any time from from 1900 till about early 1920s. One thought is that it was built for his daughters. They call it. Maybe we should call it the daughter's cottage, but we don't know that for sure. He did have a couple of daughters. However, you can see that it was quite a substantial building. There's one corner on the far left, and then we come forward. This was the other corner of the foundation. In this area where you see cement, we found there was a furnace in there, some sort of a furnace that we took out when we did one of our digs here to find out just what we could about this place. So there was a furnace, and then this basement area. Here's another corner, but then we have kind of an L. Up here it looks like what probably was a patio, or at least a porch area. And when you get closer, you can see where the first floor, this is all lower basement area. They may have used it. It could have been a usable cellar, but definitely big enough. But the floor would have come just below where you see the lintel kind of for the front of the fireplace. There's the lintel. Up here would have been the roof of the ceiling, rather, not the roof, the ceiling. And you can see where the chimney is brick, but then it's been faced with fieldstone, so to make it look really rustic. So this was obviously a rustic cabin. Who lived in it right off when it was built, we don't know, but it probably was used until the 1930s. It could even have been used till the 1940s. By whom, we don't know. But when we did our dig, we did find an old green stove. I forget the name of the stove now, but it was a modern stove. It wasn't, I don't believe, George, it was a wood-burning stove.
No.
It was a modern, probably either probably an electric, well, gas, propane maybe, I don't know. It was a modern enough stove, something you'd see in a house from the 1930s. We found so many pounds of broken glass, probably from windows, or it could have been. It doesn't look like this cottage burned down, because I don't remember finding any burned lumber or any sort of burned wood of any kind. But it probably was taken down, and then since it's in a spot that it could be kids roaming, teenagers love to explore the woods, and when you come to something like this, a building standing, I know as a kid I did. You go inside, you see what's there, and it becomes a sense of adventure for you. So it could have been that over time it just was worn away by people coming to look at it, maybe taking things that were in here. Obviously, we think it was lived in until a much later time, probably the 1940s. I do have the front door of the stove in my collection at Onatru, and a few other things, pots and pans, that sort of thing, too dented up to use nowadays. But it was fun. It was fun exploring what was in the basement. This was really all filled in down here with leaves and trees and vines. But it's a nice little fireplace. Actually, it was probably well used, heated part of the house anyway. It maybe served to keep them warm on a winter's night. So it's our mystery, and we welcome you to come stop by, maybe try to solve what used to be here.
In 2015 or 2016, this was literally in the middle of the woods. There was no trail to it, and it was covered in vines all the way up to the top of the chimney, and as Maureen has said, just a lot of debris in it. So we cleaned it up the best we can. We don't restore it or anything. We just got rid of all the debris and got rid of the vines and built a trail to it so that people can enjoy. And this is called the Cottage Trail, and you can see it on the map, and it also will point out the cottage ruins on the Leon Levy map as well. Over here we see the stabilized ruins of Dr. Kraft's Black Mansion, which Maureen will talk a little bit about it. And this was all crumbling, and there was a big hole there where the basement was after the fire. And through a grant from Shelby White and the Jerome Levy Foundation, they stabilized it. There were engineers that decided what had to come down that was beyond salvage and what could be salvaged. And it looks like it was in the days that it was built. A couple parts actually have some steel in them to hold them up, which of course you don't see. And it's a really nice place. There's some windows down there. The kids love going in and out of it. And over here you can see the very remnants of the porch, which relates to over here. It's just one of the two columns are left. And it was quite substantial. As you can see here, the first floor was all stone, and then they had cedar shingles on top, and then there was an attic up on the top of that, so it was 3 stories. You can see all of the chimneys that were there at one time. This was Dr. Kraft's retirement home. Dr. Kraft's was a world-renowned chemist at his time. He retired here in 1900. He was president of MIT up there. He was also a professor of chemistry there. He was the first professor of chemistry at Cornell. Later on, we'll see the ruins of his, what we believe are his lab, his research laboratory. We do know from contemporary writings of his peers at the time, right after his death, that he did do research here, that he had a fine, small laboratory, as they said, well suited to his needs. Some of the research that he did when he was actively employed, he didn't get a chance to write up, but once he retired, he had the time to write a lot of them up. And if you research the papers that he did, you'll see some of them from 1900 to 1905. So he was actually writing up work that he had previously done, as well as work that he had to finish little touches before it was publishable, if you will. Dr. Crafts was known for a lot of things. One of the things that he did is some of the basic elements that we have in chemistry that might be liquid or solid. He found out at what point they vaporize. In other words, let's say it turns from a liquid into a solid. And the thing that I'm always fascinated by is before he could do this, he had to invent an extremely accurate thermometer that could measure temperatures accurately at very high temperatures. And he also had to invent a very accurate barometer, because the vaporization of solids or liquids depend upon those two factors. And he did that, so I'm always very impressed. The literature says it took him about a year to invent those two devices, measurement tools, before he actually could conduct those experiments. He was considered by his peers to be, in the late 1800s, to be one of the most influential chemists in the world. He worked with other chemists both in Germany and in France, as well as here. So if you Google him and you look at his papers, unfortunately a lot of them are written in either French or German. But there are enough written in English that you can get the gist of his work and how advanced it was for his time.
To go back in time just a little bit, if you can imagine this whole area, it was a different forest. This is a really new growth forest, is what's here right now. But let's go back 10,000 years. Let's go back 9, 8, 7,000 years. It would have been home to a Native American presence. We know the Native Americans had a village or some sort of probably not a permanent village, but a temporary village down on the shores of Lake Kitchewan. Lake Kitchewan might have been much bigger too at that time. Anyway, if we gradually come forward to the 17th and 18th centuries, come to the time of the Revolutionary War, and this really nice, what looks like a plateau or a pasture right now, was probably where Colonel Sheldon bivouacked his light dragoon forces during the Revolutionary War, when they were stationed here about 1780. So if you can imagine, no stone ruins, just openness, and a few trees here and there. A company of American revolutionary soldiers bivouacked here. Their horses were kept elsewhere, but they were the cavalry of the Revolutionary War. Soldiers were here, the horses were somewhere else in South Salem. So this went from being a perfect place for indigenous people to a perfect place to bivouac soldiers, to fast forwarding to the 1890s, a perfect place for a gentleman to want to build his dream house. And that's what he did sometime between 1890 and 1901. We don't know what he called his home. Every country home had some sort of a name, but since it was abandoned for so long in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, it became known as the Black Mansion. It was empty, it was looted. All of the wonderful things that were left here by the last family that lived here, a lot of them were just taken by people wandering through the woods looking for an adventure and coming across a derelict house. What more fun than going through it and trying to figure out who lived here and why did they leave all these things. The property belonging to Crafts, when the Crafts died, it was bought by a family named Kaplan. The Kaplans were into the sugar business. They were in the sugar business, and also the lumbering business and shipping business. They were quite wealthy, but Mrs. Kaplan said, it's okay living here in the summer, but there is no heat. I'm not going to want to live in this house. So they moved to another house on the property, which is down on Ridgefield Avenue and still standing. So They just part and parcel, packed the family up, and moved to Ridgefield Avenue and abandoned this house. So it was abandoned for all those years. It was probably lived in by squatters, but it had nothing. It was not taken care of. And then on January 28th in 1979, the mansion burned. It caught fire, and before all the fire crews arrived from South Salem, from Ridgefield, from Vista, from New Canaan, they could not save the structure, and it pretty much burned to the ground. So if we just keep coming a little bit after that tragedy, it remained as ruins until in 2005 with money from the Jerome Levy Foundation, and the town restoration was started. And over the ensuing 10 years or so, you now see what we have today, which is a ruins to be wondered about. People come here and wonder, was this a long time ago? How did it get here, and what more can we find out about it?
And we're now at the restored reflecting pool at Leon Levy Preserve. It's not too far from Dr. Kraft's research laboratory. And a reflecting pool, we believe this was built by for Dr. Kraft's around 1900. And reflecting pools were basically still bodies of water that people came to meditate and relax at, and they would look at the water, and you had reflections of the sky and the surrounding areas. When the town became owners of Leon Levy Preserve in 2005, this was 2 feet of water, and one of the first things the town did for the safety of small children was to fill it in with an unattractive gravel. And this was all overgrown, this area, and for 2 years we got rid of all the vines and all of the invasives and underbrush here, and we basically brought it to a state where people could see. We made a small path off the blue entrance trail, and you see over here what we did is on top of the unattractive gravel we put landscape fabric, and then we put a 3 inches of crushed bluestone on top of that. We also added a bench so people can see and just sit here and reflect. We had some bluestone that we got from the laboratory. We put the bluestone paving in, and we put some native ferns that we moved from these are Christmas ferns that we moved from other parts of the property. There's 51 ferns there, and we put a couple of Lacothaway in as well. This is basically the foundation ruins and the chimney of what we believe was Dr. Kraft's research laboratory. There's some discussion about that, but we know that he had a research laboratory here, and as I said before, we know that it was small, and we know that it was well suited to his needs. With Maureen Cole and the John Jay High School senior interns, over 3 years we did archaeological digs with Maureen. Unfortunately, we were not able to come up with much at all as far as laboratory equipment or anything like that. Part of the reason may or may not have to do with it was turned into a residence after Dr. Kraft left this place in 1917, I believe it was, after his death. We do know from the readings of contemporary people that he did actively work for approximately 8 to 10 years, still working on some of his research and writing papers. And we do know from those that he did some minor research here. He also had an additional laboratory that MIT gave him to do research up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So he probably worked in both. So he was here during the good weather, summer months and so forth, and then during the winter months he went back to his residence in Massachusetts.
There were clues that there had been a fire here, because we found pounds and pounds of glass, and most of that glass was burned. It was all melted together and was had some incredible sculptures made by the fire. I looked through South Salem Fire Department records. There was a fire someplace on this property in the 1970s, I think it was. But all the department's notes said was fire at Kaplan Estate. So it could have been here, and it rekindled, so they came back. Don't know where it was, and it didn't say whether it was a structure or what it might have been. But obviously, in going and digging through here and in coming up with all sorts of glass, any kind of glass except laboratory glass. We found no laboratory kind of instruments or glass here, but lots of domestic glass. We had found curtains. We found obviously things that you would have found in a kitchen of a house in the 1940s. And teenagers who lived in the Lake Kitchewan area, this was their playground. They would come up, and in talking to at least one of those people, he remembered a family, or at least a couple living in this house. So we know it was lived in as a residential area house. But before that, if it was a lab, it could have been. I also was told by somebody who had explored the house, the mansion, before it burned. He thought, in just roaming through the upstairs of the mansion, that there was a room that looked like it could have been a laboratory, because there was like a bench like you'd find in your high school lab, and he wondered if that was where Dr. Crafts might have also done some of his work. So there's so many mysteries to solve. Come and hike and find a mystery to solve yourself. But again, you can see where the different kind of where floors might have been. You can see a roof line way up at the top of the chimney where the roof cut into the chimney. So lots of things to still figure out. There was a patio. There were flagstone behind this building that seemed to indicate the back door was where that mullein plant is growing. And go through there, and the flags, actually, some of the flagstones are still standing against the little back wall. The flags went all the way around here, came into, there was another structure here, probably a garage or storage room, but definitely people went out the back door, around the back, and came into whatever this structure was. So there are a lot of things you can find out when you get your shovels and your brooms handy and do a dig.
Thanks so much for being with us on LCTV and coming with us and looking at the ruins of Leon Levy Preserve.
It was a fine day for our historic tour, and we hope we've opened your eyes to some of the wonders of Lewisboro, especially here in Leon Levy Preserve on Smith Ridge Road in Lewisboro, New York.